My name is Dan Sandink. I'm Director of Research at the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. I co-chair the Infrastructure Buildings Working Group with Chad Nelson, who's here. So I'll pass it, I'll end my remarks there, and I'll pass it over to Chad Nelson.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Dan. And I trust you can hear me, or somebody will make a silly face towards me. But it really is a pleasure. Wow, 31 meetings. That's great that we're there. So I would very much first like to say thank you, Dan, for your opening the meeting and all the complex mechanics truly behind today's call. Thanks also to everyone who's joined us today, and it really is wonderful to see familiar faces and also to welcome new ones around this important table. Before I begin, I would like to note that it is International Women's Day. I also want to acknowledge for those of us dialing in from Ottawa that we are located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, home to the Algonquin, Huron, Wyandot, Mohawk, Anishinaabe, and St. Lawrence Iroquoian peoples. I'm sure many people on this call have seen the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th Assessment Report on Impacts, Adaptation, and Vulnerability. And a key finding in that report is truly that delays in adaptation will disproportionately increase costs of adaptation, increase the exposure, vulnerability, and reduce the effectiveness of our available adaptation options amidst continued warming and some would say climate weirding. In this context, the Infrastructure and Buildings Working Group has a very important role to play in fostering an exchange of leading practices. A few of the domains that are covered by the presenters at our quarterly meetings include data, guidance, vulnerability assessments, adaptation strategies, professional development, funding, international advances, as well as addressing low carbon resilience and natural infrastructure. Work in these areas is fast moving. And while there are many initiatives in motion that I could mention, I'd like to briefly touch on two important pieces of work that Infrastructure Canada has been involved in. And one notably, we discussed our last IBWG meeting when we had Carolyn Larive of Uranos provide an overview of the National Adaptation Strategy, and specifically the Resilient Built and Natural Infrastructure Advisory Table. Phase one work of the advisory tables is culminated in a draft national adaptation strategy framework, and phase two is kicking off with a public symposium in the spring with key partners, stakeholders, and Canadians to begin discussions on the short-term actions and to share plans and efforts on adaptation, identifying opportunities to collaborate. For more information on this in our office, please contact Geneviève Nadeau or myself, and I can connect you with her and our team. The second piece I wanted to mention is the National Climate Change Science Plan that's being led by Environment Climate Change Canada. The science plan is positioned as a key next step in implementing Climate Science 2050, which is the title of that report from December 2020 was Advancing Science and Knowledge on Climate Change and the Resilient Communities and Built Environment sub-theme. It's led by Infrastructure Canada and the National Research Council, one of our presenters today. For this, more information about that, please contact Catherine Lafleur, who's here on this call as well. I'd also like to highlight a resource that came to my attention recently from our friends and colleagues at the American Society of Civil Engineers, also a link to one of our presenters here today. I saw recently, and I think people on this call like to know, that a book was published by the American Society of Civil Engineers titled Impacts of Future Weather and Climate Extremes on the United States Infrastructure, Assessing and Prioritizing Adaptation Actions. It summarizes changes in various extreme meteorological, hydrological events, assesses vulnerabilities of infrastructure, and reviews frameworks and that decision makers can use to prioritize kind of tight budgets. So with all of that preface, I would like now to turn to the really important aspects of today's talk, which is to introduce their presenters that have kindly agreed to take their time to share with us their leading work. So first I'll mention Melissa Pennicad and Michael Sanio, who will present on the Envision framework. Melissa is Managing Director at the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. She works with governments and their private sector partners in the architecture, engineering, and construction industries to develop sustainable and resilient future using ISI signature Envision framework, something I think we've probably heard of, but we'll be great to learn more today. Melissa oversees ISI's global project verification program and leads research, communications, and business development efforts. She's based in Halifax. and is ISI's Canadian representative. Michael Sanio is the executive advisor on sustainability at the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. He has a diverse background at local, national, and international levels in the areas of environment and sustainable development. And he held the position of executive advisor on sustainability at the American Society of Civil Engineers, where he was responsible for providing leadership on sustainability globally. One of his most notable accomplishments was his work on establishing a sustainability program that led to the formation of ISI. Our second presentation will be presented by Guy Maillot, who will present on the resilience considerations in the delivery of the new Samuel de Champlain Bridge from an owner's perspective. Guy is the chief engineer for the Samuel de Champlain Bridge Corridor at Infrastructure Canada, and he's a member of the Quebec Order of Engineers. He's a fellow of the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering, links back to Envision there, and a fellow of the Engineering Institute of Canada. For over 35 years as both consultant and an owner, Guy's career has focused on the design, inspection, evaluation, and rehabilitation of bridges, and his last 9 years have been devoted to the Samuel de Champlain Bridge, really a signature world-class bridge recently opened to traffic. Our third presenter is Marianne Armstrong, a familiar face, hopefully, to many people on this call today. She'll present an update on the National Research Council's Climate Resilient Built Environment program. She is the initiative leader for the National Research Council of Canada's Climate Resilient Built Environment Initiative. And from 2016 to 2020, I had the pleasure really to work closely with Marianne, but as she managed the Climate Resilient Buildings and Core Public Infrastructure Initiative. In government, we make long titles of initiatives. We have a web page at INFC that outlines many of the deliverables from that work. And in leading that work, it really served to integrate climate resilience into Canadian building and infrastructure standards, codes, guidelines. After a one-year period as Director of Stakeholder Engagement and Management with Codes Canada, where she led the research program in support of Canada's national model building codes, Marianne has returned to her passion to define the next 5 years of research to support climate resilient buildings and infrastructure in Canada. Following these presentations, we'll have two brief partner updates. We'll hear from Harshan Radhakrishnan, Manager of Climate Change and Sustainability Initiatives at Engineers and Geoscientists, British Columbia, as well as Kurt Hull, a Project Manager with Brace in Manitoba for an infrastructure project for engineers and geoscientists in Manitoba. Cet appel, je devrais dire aussi que cet appel sera tenu en anglais toutefois, mais nous serions heureux de répondre aux questions en français ou en anglais. Thank you in advance very much to all of our speakers for being here today. I would now like to pass the mic to Melissa and Michael Sanio. I think, Mike, maybe you were going to begin and then pass to Melissa. Sorry for anybody I spoke too quickly. I'm happy to bilaterally follow up. I wanted to quickly get through the intro so we could get to the substance of today's meetings. Mike, over to you then.
Well, thank you very much, Chad. It's a pleasure joining you all as a Canadian, a transplant Canadian. Also want to acknowledge International Women's Day and a shout out to a Canadian, a Peruvian, Rosa Galvez, and she provided a keynote on World Engineers Day for Sustainable Development on March the 4th. And so would encourage you to see that on YouTube. Let me pull up my slides here. There's quite a large slide deck. I'm going to spend only 2 or 3 minutes to provide some context for the ISI Envision framework, which Melissa will go into a little bit more detail on. My past full-time position was with American Society of Civil Engineers. I was there for about 17 years. And I led the effort to really drive the incorporation of the triple bottom line, sustainability, into everything the organization did. And that included a major revision to its code of ethics, which you'll see here, that calls out the triple bottom line, ensuring that what we do first and foremost serves people and communities, that it doesn't simply protect the environment, but goes further to restore harm to the environment through the way we design, build, operate infrastructure, and then drive life cycle costs, reducing the life cycle of infrastructure systems that we design and build.
Mike, sorry to interrupt, but I think you may need to share your screen.
Let me go back here. Bear with me. Thank you for the heads up. Here we go. Is it there?
You can see it. Yep. You may want to put it into presentation mode.
Okay, here we go. And I got to shrink this screen here. All right. So you have in front of you the Code of Ethics. ASCE creates policies. The policies are reviewed on a 3-year cycle. The policy on sustainable development and the engineer's role, key principles here: doing the right project and doing the project right. Again, driving the triple bottom line. ASCE is a professional organization. Its code of ethics is enforceable on its members, and the policies guide the practice. An additional policy that we developed was focused on the owner's commitment. Many of our members, many engineers work for the public sector or for private owners, and this policy provides language that those owners can use to encourage suppliers to address the principles of sustainability into the projects and programs that they're doing on behalf of them. ASCE conducts a report card on a 3-year cycle as well. And what we've observed is that the quality of that infrastructure is really not improved. And for that reason, we needed to take another tack, and that is to figure out how we can ensure that the little funding that is available for infrastructure is actually applied wisely, if you want. And there are a number of ways of doing that. Looking certainly for new funding sources, looking at the private sector, sovereign capital funds and otherwise, policy actions. And as we know, over time, the infrastructure needs increase because of population increases and changes in demographics and otherwise. So in terms of policy actions and approaches, ASCE had helped create the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. You'll learn more about that. And in addition, has developed a standard that defines the triple bottom line and could be used directly into procurement. That standard will be published later on this year in June. It's really going through the final stages of approval. It's a standard that's been 4 years in the making and more or less tracks the Envision rating framework. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa. Melissa?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm just now going to switch over and share my slides. So just give me 1 second, please. Kindly let me know, give me a thumbs up or something if you can see my slides.
We can see them.
Okay, brilliant. Great. So it's my pleasure to be here today. Thanks very much for the invitation to come and speak to you about the Envision framework. I'm going to start by briefly giving a quick overview on ISI, the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. So we're a nonprofit education and research organization based in Washington, D.C. We were founded by the American Public Works Association, the American Council of Engineering Companies, and the American Society of Civil Engineers. ISI owns, develops, manages, and administers the Envision framework and rating system for sustainable infrastructure. So that is really our reason for being. but we definitely don't do what we do alone, and we've got some fantastic partners. We just announced recently a new partnership in Canada with the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering, and the purpose of that partnership is to accelerate the use of sustainable infrastructure practices across Canada using the Envision framework as a key tool to achieving that outcome. We also do a lot of work with the Zofnass Program for Sustainable Infrastructure at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. We have ICMQ as a partner in Italy. They're a nonprofit serving the construction industry. And we've also got a great partner in Mexico helping us to advance the use of Envision in Mexico and Latin America. Our members include more than 200 public agencies and more than 250 private sector companies in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. So collectively, we're all working together to advance sustainable and resilient infrastructure. So this brings me to Envision. So this is our signature product. It's a framework that enables a thorough examination of the sustainability and resiliency of infrastructure, provides a common language for all stakeholders to engage in meaningful conversations around sustainability and resiliency. And at a 10,000-foot level, Envision asks two overarching questions. What is the right project to pursue in the context of community needs, goals, and issues? And then once we determine the right project to pursue, we turn to further guidance in Envision pertaining to how to plan, design, and deliver the project the right way being the most sustainable and resilient way possible. There are many components included within the Envision framework. So there's a comprehensive guidance manual, project self-assessment tools that can be used. We also offer professional training and credentialing in the use of Envision. We have a project verification and awards program that is based on the number of points achieved in the Envision system, so verified all the way up to the Platinum Award level. And throughout my presentation, I've got some photos of Envision awarded projects, and we'll be hearing about one of them coming up, the Samuel de Champlain Bridge. So Envision is a framework that applies to all types and sizes of infrastructure, everything from energy and water projects through to landscape projects, various transportation projects. Essentially anything that comprises civil works is applicable to Envision. We just don't rate buildings per se, as that's very well covered under other rating systems such as LEED. Envision is a great tool that helps governments and communities address a number of pressing priorities and challenges. So Envision can be used to support the attainment of net zero energy and emissions, as an example. It's a great tool to help mitigate and adapt to climate change. There's credits within Envision that focus on equity and social cohesion, economic development, sustainable resource management. The list goes on. And what I've done on this next slide is I'm giving you a view of, at a glance, all of these sustainability and resilience indicators that are included in the Envision framework. So it really covers everything under the sun that comprises sustainability and resiliency from an infrastructure perspective. And I've highlighted particular credits on this slide that link back to those community and government priorities on the previous slide. I want to also give you a credit close-up. So when I talk about this term credit, this is a term that we use to talk about each sustainability and resiliency indicator that's included in the framework. So we call them Envision credits. There are 64 of them in total, divided across 5 credit categories, including quality of life, leadership, resource allocation, natural world, and of course, climate and resilience. And each credit is formed in the same way. So typically it's presented in a 2-page spread. One thing that I really like about Envision, having worked with it over the last many years, is that it takes very complex topics and distills them down into action items that can be implemented on any type of infrastructure project. So here we can see on the screen what a typical credit looks like in the Envision system. This is the first credit in the Envision framework, focused on improving community quality of life. There are points associated with it, different levels of achievement, so you can advance from improved just above conventional practice all the way up to restorative, which is an explicit recognition of restoring a degraded natural or social system. So there's lots of information presented in the manual in a very condensed format, allowing for a lot of flexibility and adaptability on the part of project teams to advance performance in each one of these credit areas. So Envision harnesses a number of proven strategies to face sustainability and resiliency challenges head on. One of them is the use of the mitigation hierarchy, where first we're prioritizing avoiding creating any impacts. And then of course, when we cannot avoid impacts, we look to mitigate, abate, offset. So that's definitely something that you will see woven throughout the Envision framework. Another one is stakeholder engagement. Envision really promotes this idea of reaching out to the broadest swath of society possible when making sustainability and resiliency decisions on infrastructure projects. And this brings me to this slide that I always like to show people, how Envision and expands the opportunity for performance improvement. So Envision not only addresses 64 sustainability and resiliency indicators, but it also looks at the entire life cycle of a project and includes credits that directly relate to projects in the planning and design stage, but also encourages project teams to think about sustainability during operations and maintenance, and even end-of-life considerations. I've already touched on stakeholder engagement being a core theme embedded in Envision. So again, Envision really encourages project teams to think beyond their core team and really embracing the community and the general public as stakeholders where possible. And then also there are the different performance levels included in Envision as well. So for each credit, some projects may be able to achieve an improved or just above conventional level of achievement, whereas others may be more targeting a net zero impact, which would be the conserving level of achievement, or restorative is even beyond that. I briefly mentioned already that one of the aspects of Envision is providing this common language around sustainability and resilience for stakeholders to engage and interact with and work with each other. So Envision does promote multidisciplinary teamwork and collaboration. It does a great job promoting interagency collaboration as well, meaningful stakeholder engagement, and creating a shared vision, essentially, of what sustainability and resiliency means in the context of each infrastructure project using the framework. Envision recognizes innovation as well. So many projects that use Envision are going above and beyond even the highest level of achievement in one or more credits, or they're doing something extraordinary to overcome significant barriers and challenges to sustainability. or they're implementing new or innovative methodologies, using innovative materials, technologies, or processes to further improve sustainability. And in some cases, there could be projects that are addressing elements of sustainability that are not necessarily already covered by Envision. So all of these things are recognized and rewarded through the use of Envision. Globally, there is over $130 billion of infrastructure development that is in ISI's Envision verification program. So that includes the 126 fully verified projects to date, as well as the many more that are registered for review or currently undergoing review. There are more than 6,000 professionals trained in the use of Envision. More than 100 public agencies are using Envision. And here in Canada, Envision is explicitly referenced in Canada's climate lens as well. I'm nearing the end of my presentation, but I would be remiss to not mention explicit Envision use in Canada. So you can see on the slide some of the municipalities and agencies that have made commitments to the use of Envision or put one or more projects through verification. There are 12 Envision verified projects to date in this country. 2 are currently undergoing review, and an additional 11 are registered for review, and we have more than 400 folks who are trained in the use of Envision across Canada. Envision is being used in a multitude of ways, everything from proactively during the very early stages of project planning and design to retroactively confirming the sustainability performance of projects post-construction. We're certainly seeing Envision being applied in whole or in part. And some organizations are making very strong commitments to the use of Envision to achieve their sustainability goals. But we're seeing many projects, not necessarily going through verification. That is an optional process. So many are also using the framework to inform their sustainable design guidelines and conduct self-assessments of their projects as well. And then why are owners using Envision? Well, quite frankly, many owners are wanting to walk the talk and using a credible system like Envision as a way to align their efforts with their sustainability goals. The verification process in particular really does help to improve project management practices. Envision is recognized as a framework that does address the broadest range of social, environmental, and economic impacts, which is another reason for owners using the framework. And owners say that they are finding increased long-term viability through better resilience and preparedness on their projects. And that is it. So thank you. That's a very quick overview of Envision, but I really appreciate the opportunity. And Chad, I'm happy for this slide deck to be distributed after this. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, that's terrific, Melissa and Mike. Thank you to you both for your presentations. Were quite insightful today on really a vital framework for articulating and I think mobilizing more interest on what can and should be done as we try to increase the quality of the investments that are made. So at this time, we have an opening for questions. And so sometimes Dan and I kind of collaborate on fielding the questions where people raise hands or simply speak up. I also do wish to note that if we don't have many questions at this juncture, we can sort of add them after Guy's presentation, because there's obviously a resonance there between the work that was done with the Samuel Champlain Bridge. I know I have one back pocket question, which I'm building on Dan's good skill in previous calls to have a reserve question. But if I don't hear or see anybody, I'm trying to manage Zoom the best I can and look for any. Oh, I see there Robert Bellisi and Ian Pilkington. Okay, I'm going to go from the top. And Ian, I've got you listed at the top. I'm sorry, Robert, if you came first, but let's start with Ian, if we could.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you for that presentation. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Ian Pilkington, and I'm the Chief Engineer for the BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. And it's great to hear about the Envision framework. One question I had is, understand you're working with owners and as they're going through that process, is there any discussion about additional costs, like especially if they're looking at, say, an existing project, and if it was ranked at, say, at a silver, then looking at what would it take to make it from silver to gold or gold to platinum? Do you get into those kind of discussions? Or
that's a great question, Ian. So thank you for that. Yes, cost is certainly a topic that comes up a lot. And what I can say is that I think sustainability has traditionally gotten a pretty bad rap for quote unquote costing more, because the approach to sustainability hasn't necessarily been the right one. And what do I mean by that? So sometimes we see projects that are far into the design phase, and then suddenly there's this, oh, we should be making changes. We should be looking at the sustainability performance of this project. And in those cases, as the project timeline advances, the opportunity to make changes to make the project more sustainable at that stage can become rather costly. But there have been loads of examples where if Envision is used very early on at the outset of a project, even at project conception, we've actually seen capital costs drop in some cases, and certainly long-term operations and maintenance costs as well, using the Envision framework. The other comment that I'll make around cost is that there are certain aspects of Envision that really are what I'll call stretch objectives or stretch goals for many teams. So one that kind of comes to my mind immediately is there's a lot of talk around reducing the net embodied carbon of infrastructure. And so that's a hot topic, but there aren't yet necessarily the suppliers and manufacturers of materials aren't necessarily able to readily provide that information. There is still a pretty huge learning curve we're seeing in the industry around addressing that particular issue. So in that case, just using that as an example, if that was a key goal for a project team, there may be additional investment that's required in that area. But again, Envision definitely doesn't have to cost more. And I think that thinking about sustainability really early on and using a framework like Envision earlier rather than later can actually help to reduce costs.
I would echo that, and would just add that life cycle costs are being addressed in Envision. The standard that I mentioned requires a life cycle assessment. And if routinely a life cycle assessment in conjunction with the sustainability resilience requirement were included, that we would likely find that all infrastructure systems would be less costly. That's essentially why we developed the standard. It would be very interesting, and I don't think anything like this has been done, is looking at the experience of ISI and through an academic research program, if you want, what were the actual costs and what were the overall financial benefits by executing the project in a resilient, sustainable way. I suspect less.
Okay, thank you. We're running a little late on time, so Robert, I'm going to turn to you if you have a quick question here. Hi, Robert.
Sure, thanks very much. Hello, my name is Robert Bellisi. I'm the Director for Sustainable Operations at Indigenous Services Canada. So we support sustainable infrastructure on First Nations on reserve in Canada. Thanks very much for your presentation. I strongly support and very happy to see the life cycle assessment of projects. It's something that is certainly challenging to do properly, but something that is certainly top of mind in our department. My question is more, maybe not for the presenters, but individuals who had experience in applying the framework in Canada. And my first question is really related to how does the framework, or how has the framework supported all our regulatory requirements in Canada, amongst others, the requirements for major infrastructure development projects under the Impact Assessment Act of Canada. For example, has it worked well together in order to meet those regulatory requirements or not? Would be interested to know about that. And secondly is interesting to see the 64 sustainability indicators or criteria that you have. I'm wondering if there has been an alignment as well with the Sustainable Development Goals that both the US and Canada have sort of put forth as things to follow for all of our investments. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so Rob, you've got a multifaceted question there, and I'll do my best to very quickly respond. I think it would be great, to hear from Guy regarding his team's experience using Envision. Prior to me joining ISI, just so that you know, I used to put projects through the verification process, so I do have direct experience using Envision in the Canadian context. It works very well. And Envision version 3, which is the latest version of Envision, we went through great lengths to ensure lots of Canadians participated in the process to make sure that it was well aligned with requirements here. And then regarding your question, which is now escaping me, remind me of the second part of your question there, Rob.
It was just the 64 criteria that you use for the sustainability. I think we have all different understandings of what sustainability is. So the more the merrier, of course, but do they align to the SDGs and the commitments that our governments have given us to follow?
Yeah, so they do. Of course, Envision was launched prior to the SDGs, but we do have educational content that shows how well aligned Envision is with the SDGs. So yes, a ton of alignment there, absolutely. And after this, I can direct you to some additional resources. Okay,
that's great. Thanks. In the interest of time, I'm keen to move forward, but I do see, Daryl, is there a chance I know you've got an international experience in the engineers. If it can be very quick, we're about 6 minutes late into our next presentation. But
really, really quickly. Hi, thank you. Melissa, I'm just wondering if you could give us a quick idea of how many, if any, projects, Envision projects have used the IVC tool, the Canadian tool, to assess infrastructure.
So Daryl, I don't know, but I personally have looked into PIVC, think it is so well aligned with the climate and resilience credit category in Envision, and have even been advocating internally for ISI staff to go through that training, because I think it would be great from a professional development standpoint. So I'd be really interested in kind of continuing the conversation with you after and see if there are, ways that we maybe can work together.
Yeah, and that, Daryl, Dan and I, David, have had several discussions about that kind of alignment and making it clear and explicit. Good point.
Thanks. And this is great to see the level of interest and the engagement here. I won't get into my questions on governance and how knowledge emerges. We'll come back later. So Guy, Mayo, I'm going to turn to you now to welcome you to begin your presentation regarding your experience with the Samuel de Champlain Bridge. And it follows logically our presentation on Envision. So thank you very much. I'm starting to see your screen, Guy, is showing up.
Good.
Yep. Thanks. Yep. Okay, over to you.
And you can hear me, right? So, well, first of all, hello to all from Montreal. It's real pleasure to give this presentation describing some of the resilience and sustainability considerations which were accounted for in the delivery of the bridge. I hope you will enjoy the presentation and hopefully find it interesting. As to start with, you can appreciate in this slide the new and original bridge. Unfortunately, this scene no longer exists as shown. The original bridge is currently being totally deconstructed after only 60 years of service, so not a very good example of how we define sustainability. Some of the project highlights include a contract award in June 19, 2015 under a PPP delivery model for about 4 billion Canadian dollars. A project agreement which includes a combination of performance-based and prescriptive requirements. For information, when it was started, it was one of the largest transportation infrastructure projects in North America. The new Samuel de Champlain Bridge is responsible for about 50 million vehicles and 11 million public transit users per year, and also supports annually about 20 billion or in excess of 20 billion in Canada-US trade. Some of the technical highlights included an initial target date for bridge opening, which set an aggressive 42-month design build period, design life of 125 years for all non-replaceable components, 3 distinct corridors with the central one dedicated to mass transit. You can see that there. As the bridge is the gateway to Montreal, the bridge visual impact was very important to the community. High architectural expectations were met by incorporating a signature cable-stayed bridge with distinctive W-shaped pier caps, a slightly curved bridge, and a sophisticated architectural lighting system. State-of-the-art investigation for wind and ice were carried out for the bridge and its stay cables. State-of-the-art design approach with peer review was also required with respect to seismic design for a lifeline bridge, using at the time the new Canadian performance-based design approach. Technical requirements also included the development of a risk and threat assessment with hardening measures. And as we noted, the project required envision recognition. We started with the bronze level. However, platinum level, the highest levels, was ultimately achieved. The bridge measures 3.4 kilometers and links Brossard on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River to Ile-des-Sarres, which forms part of the city of Montreal. The main section, comprising an iconic 529 meter long asymmetrical cable stay bridge, spans over the International Seaway Navigational Channel. The bridge has a very slender tower and 240 meter main span. The stays are arranged in a harp arrangement. The tower extends 159 meters from the base of its footing. The bridge has 2 vertical cable planes with no cables crossing over traffic. The shape of the bridge and the layout of its stays were in fact imposed by the owner. The bridge has 3 corridors, the central corridor being dedicated to mass transit, where a light rail system is currently being implemented. The bridge is very wide at 60.2 meters. It may well be the widest cable stay bridge in the world, supported by only 2 cable planes. These 2 images help appreciate the structure. The stays have a sheath diameter of 315 millimeter, and the longest stay measures about 244 meters. The stays are equipped with a unique system of rings to meet specific climate needs, which I'll discuss in a bit more detail. For various reasons, including the poor performance of the original Champlain Bridge, durability was a key consideration. In this respect, Infrastructure Canada imposed a 125-year design life for all non-replaceable components, which included the foundation units, substructure, superstructure, and the deck slab. Stay cables were designed to current best practices with a targeted 65-year design life, but most importantly, were conceived to be replaceable. Other imposed requirements included the need to develop a durability plan and undertake timed corrosion modeling using state-of-the-art techniques. Fatigue resistance of all components considered over the extended design life. The need to account for stray electrical currents, and this is of particular significance considering the current implementation of an electrified rail system, and integration of a good access and inspection system. And I'll also say a few words on that. Special requirements imposed for durability design included the use of stainless steel rebar for 100% of the deck slab and other strategic locations, probably the highest use of stainless rebar for any project in North America. Service life demonstrated using FIB Bulletin 34, which is a model code for service life design. We incorporate high performance concrete with ternary cements, providing very high resistance to chloride ion penetration. Special concrete mixes had to be developed to resist ice abrasion in the river. And there is a comprehensive structural health monitoring system with over 400 individual instruments. Of course, resilience and durability cannot be achieved solely from a design perspective. It must be looked at holistically to include the construction phase, for example, ensuring quality of construction and choice of materials, but also the operational phase, including routine maintenance and inspections. It is said that a bridge that is well maintained is one that is easily accessible. In this respect, Infrastructure Canada specified a variety of specialized access devices, including some which are shown in these images. We have a stay cable inspection gantry as shown in image A, an unmanned stay cable inspection system or cable robot, which is shown in image B, an under-bridge maintenance gantry or traveler that covers the entire cable stayed bridge. And we also have two tower cradles as shown in image D to facilitate inspection and maintenance of the main span tower. We also have an extensive network of staircases and ladders in the hollow piers and pier caps. There's actually a shuttle path in the structure's 3.4 kilometer long box girders and a whole bunch of other devices, including an elevator in the main span tower. Special investigations related to design of the stay cables to mitigate ice shedding issues started with the specific climate study. This was performed by the National Research Council of Canada, where it was determined that Montreal experiences 6.3 icing events per year on average, based on 347 freezing rain events, and where the 1 in 50 year ice accretion on the cylinder would correspond to about 33 millimeters of ice as a result of 60 millimeters of vertical freezing rain. It is interesting to note that the current Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code classifies Montreal as a heavy zone for ice, where ice accretion of 31 millimeters is expected. To make matters worse, the Canadian Global Climate Model suggested likely increases in icing events, particularly for the months of December, February, and March. And ice accretion affects both ice shedding concerns, but also the risk of aerodynamic excitation under wind and ice loading. This graph reports 55 years of icing data for Montreal. Two events stand out, which correspond to the famous 1998 Montreal ice storm. Some may recall the ice storm of 1998. The two images to the left show a picture taken on the Jacques Cartier Bridge. I'm actually the person in the photo to the left, somewhat amazed, where I had recorded up to 100 millimeters of ice buildup and had estimated about 800 tons of ice on the bridge, which was later reported in the Montreal La Presse newspaper. The image to the right shows the consequence of falling ice from the cables of the Arthur Ravenel Jr. Bridge in South Carolina. A number of cable stayed bridges have experienced similar issues related to ice shedding. To mitigate ice shedding problems, our private partner was required to develop and apply procedures for reducing and mitigating risk of interruptions to users due to snow or ice falling off the traffic lanes, onto the traffic lanes. Working with the supplier of the stay cable system, a significant amount of R&D was performed to investigate the problem and to develop a mitigation approach. The adopted solution consisted of modifying the conventional helical filleted system shown in the image to the left by incorporating a system of rings with greater height so as to favor breakup of the ice into smaller and more fragile pieces. To investigate the aerodynamic stability of ice stays equipped with the special rings, the NRC was able to numerically simulate the formation of various ice patterns on a stay accounting for Montreal's specific climate, as shown on the image to the left, then use 3D printing to prepare 1 to 3 scale models of various ice formation patterns, as shown in the central image, and then lastly, to test the ice states in their wind tunnel facility, which is shown in the image to the right. This represents quite innovative and leading edge testing in the field of ice-induced stay cable excitation. Investigations in a climate chamber of the ice shedding character were also performed at full scale in Force Technology Laboratory in Denmark. The images on this slide show from left to right the ice shedding properties of the custom cable sheathing. All stays on the bridge were equipped with dampers to mitigate against rain, wind-induced vibration of the stays, galloping due to ice accretion on the stays, and to counteract the negative aerodynamic damping properties of the stays with ice. Others, such as Matijika et al. From Aarhus University in Denmark, are also investigating ways to mitigate the troubling problem of ice shedding. In this case, a potential retrofit strategy, as a retrofit strategy, a stay is wrapped with heavy steel rope mesh, as shown on the image to the left. Their approach is based on the thinking that the mesh will hold the ice in place longer, allowing it to melt and or shed in a number of smaller events. The researchers simulated ice formation for both a smooth pipe and a pipe equipped with 4 types of steel rope meshing, and then heated the interior of the pipes, measuring the mass loss with time. For the smooth pipe, you can see from the graph on the right that the ice sheds in a single large event, as shown by the blue line here, in comparison to the retrofitted stay shown by the red line. In this case, under the same icing condition, the mesh holds onto the ice, allowing it to melt and shed in about 7 smaller events and over a much longer period of time of about 180 minutes. The supplier of the innovative ring sheathing system on this Hamilton-Champlain bridge has continued to research the problem and has proposed the ring system in combination with an active system which rotates the sheet. IBWG has provided the following video which illustrates the concept and the ice testing setup. Note how the ice builds up at the rings, which can then hold on to the ice. The formation of a symmetrical pattern of accretion favors retention and also favors the aerodynamic properties of the ice stays. To give you a sense of what can happen to bridge stays if the issue of rain, wind induced extension is not properly accounted for, I have a short video clip obtained from a lecture provided with permission from Professor Holger Svensson of the Technical University of Dresden. You can see how the cables are working really hard under the excitation. Infrastructure Canada also required the undertaking of state-of-the-art wind studies. These were performed by Western University. Canada is fortunate to have 3 of the world's leading wind research institutes, namely the NRC, RWDI, and Western University. Wind effects were required to consider the effects of the neighboring original Champlain Bridge and the effects of wind on traffic. Wind characteristics of the site were performed by Western University, including the collection of wind data directly from the original Champlain Bridge before the PPP project was issued. Sectional wind tunnel testing with traffic was performed by Westwind Laboratory in California, and full aeroelastic wind tunnel testing at 1 to 150 scale was carried out at Western University. The bridge was to remain aerodynamically stable for the 1 in 10,000 year winds corresponding to 48 meters per second. The bridge was actually stable for winds approaching 70 meters per second or 252 kilometers per hour. Sectional models of the bridge are shown here with and without traffic. The particular configuration of the bridge with wide gaps between the 3 corridors is quite favorable to the bridge response to wind. Without the gaps, you can just imagine a 60-meter wide airplane wing. The bridge was required to be tested with and without the presence of the original bridge in both the final configuration and critical construction stages. Pictures are shown here in the wind tunnel facility at Western University. You can also appreciate that the effects of the construction equipment used during the construction, such as the tall tower crane, which was also accurately accounted for in the investigations. This event occurred on June 10, 2008 on the original Champlain Bridge. A number of trucks were affected. It looks like the light pole in the image to the right may have helped prevent the tractor trailer from actually falling off the bridge. In the image to the left, you have something that looks like a domino effect, all to say that, the wind also affects the users of the bridge. Fires were typically of concern for the heritage type of timber bridges. We don't usually think of fire protection in the context of a modern steel bridge. However, bad shit can happen. In 1992, as a consultant, I was involved in the replacement of a short overpass located at the south end of the Jacques-Cartier Bridge in Montreal. Only 2 years after the original structure was replaced, a diesel tanker truck flipped over directly under the new overpass. I was called in to assist in the emergency response and reinstatement works. Just to say that the steel was totally distorted, the rubber bearings had melted, and concrete had spalled off the deck and abutments. For the new Samuel Champlain Bridge, some attention was given to fire protection. The stay cables of the bridge have fire protection in their lower portion, so I guess you can say that they are designed for both fire and ice. The bridge has 2 large emergency generators concealed in its abutments, which are equipped with fire suppression systems. Also, as part of the risk and threat mitigation, the bridge had to be able to resist a significant pool of ignited fuel in the event of a fuel spill on its deck. This was required in an effort to help deliver a resilient bridge. With respect to earthquake, the bridge was designed as a lifeline bridge and designed using the new performance-based design approach that was initiated at the time. Under this new Canadian design approach, for a 1 in 1,000 year event, we would expect that it would be business as normal. Under a severe 1 in 2,500 year event having a 2% probability of exceedance in 50 years, we would expect that the bridge would be usable for emergency traffic. At least 50% of the lanes would remain operational. The light rate train would be serviceable at reduced speeds, but most importantly, the bridge would be repairable. All to say that in the context of a resilience and sustainability, we will want to preserve a $2.2 billion investment without having to fully demolish and rebuild for the next 105 years or more. And I think I'll end my talk on that note. And with that, thank you very much.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much, Guy, for that extensive and important and in-depth presentation. In the interest of time, it's a little bit after 2 o'clock. We were going to turn to the presentation from Marianne Armstrong. I guess I would like to suggest that we could make sure we are availing ourselves of the chat function to identify questions that people may wish to ask. I may wish, I guess, to make a quick offer, as we did for last time, even though a little overtime wise. If anybody raises their hand, we'll try to take 1 or 2 questions. We maybe just steal a few minutes from our concluding time at the end of the meeting. But I also wanted, if I'm still seeing no hands, you can hear me stalling for time like radio here, then if we have no immediate questions, we can, and people develop ideas that they'd like to put forward or ask about, please do use the chat function. I think it is another way that people can engage broadly as participating in the call. And I'm pleased to see already some people have shared contact information and interest broadly in that chat function. I don't see any questions. I don't hear anybody hollering for me. So with that, yeah, I'm going to say thank you. I've had messages here on the side that people have enjoyed the presentation, and it's really important. And I had the pleasure of standing inside that wind tunnel at the National Research Council, and nobody turned it on. It's really important, good work. So with this, I think Marianne Armstrong will be our next presenter from the National Research Council, and maybe you can start to queue up your presentation, Marianne, on the future work related underneath the Climate Resilient Built Environment Initiative. Thank you again, Guy.
Trying to get this to work.
It's looking good.
Is that showing the right screen?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. All right, just want to make sure I can see everybody. Okay, so yeah, I'm Marianne Armstrong, and it's a pleasure to be here again. I think I check in once a year or so, or maybe a little less at times. But this is a really exciting time for me to give you an update on the work we're doing. I also wanted to give a shout out to Guy, saying I really appreciated seeing all the science behind the design of the bridge, and it really is quite something to see all the information that goes into that. And from our standpoint, we're trying to make sure that science is then captured into standards and guidance, so that we can ensure that not just very important bridges are designed with climate considerations, but that all our bridges and infrastructure are designed that way. So thank you, Guy, for that too. Thanks. So I want to dig in to spend a moment to recognize that we've just completed our first phase of work with Infrastructure Canada, which is our climate resilient buildings and core public infrastructure initiative. So that was about a year ago. And thankfully we're still going. So we're lucky enough to be allowed to go do more research and contribute to resilience of Canada's assets for the next 5 years. Ultimately, realistically, I don't want to be in this research space forever. The idea is to raise the bar, get the information out in such a way that it becomes commonplace to design resiliently in this country. And the researchers can go off and do something else. But right now we're at the point where we need that foundation, we need that fundamental research to enable design for future climates. So under our first initiative, we worked closely with Infrastructure Canada with a goal of enabling Canada to design and build for the future by integrating climate resilience into code, standards, and guidance for buildings and infrastructure. I like to say it was a big success. I'm quite proud of what we accomplished, along with many people who are on this call today. We had a network of over 200 different collaborators. We worked with expertise right across the NRC on infrastructure and building science, coastal and river engineering, hydrology, aerodynamics, building codes, and similarly right across Canada with a variety of different expertise brought to bear. And really, we are at the leading edge of this effort internationally in a number of ways. We see some countries waking up and now catching up a little bit, but it really did give us a chance to get started in this area and now to share that knowledge with our international friends as well. And ultimately, what we've done is develop a suite of evidence-based guidance as well as standards on how to adapt, but we are not done yet. Here's some highlights that I wanted to share just from the first phase of work before I pivot to tell you what we're working on now. We hope as well to update our website to include links to additional publications and information. I'll include that link as well at the end of the presentation so you can check that out. But some of the successes I want to highlight are the future climatic design data that we've developed for the design of buildings and bridges. The link is provided here. We work closely with HICC and Environment Canada to come up with that data set. It's first data set to include things like wind in it as well, which is essential for the design or the climate loads that we need to design for bridges and buildings. So all that's available there. We're now working with the National Building Code to see whether we can integrate that consideration and future climates in there, as well as working with Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code for the next editions in 2025. In the first phase two, we worked closely with the CSA group and the Canadian Electrical Code, where a series of international workshops developed 50 proposals for change to the Canadian Electrical Code. Again, I'm happy to say that some of those have been adopted now in the Part 1 code that was published about a year ago, especially in particular moving things out of the basement and above flood levels for the electrical system, which seems like a small thing, but it was something that wasn't yet addressed in the electrical code. So pleased to say that that's now in there. And we hope to as well work with those committees in the coming years to integrate some of the remaining changes that were proposed. As well, we've developed a number of guidelines, standards, new guideline on coastal flood hazard and risk assessment. We have a guideline on the cost benefit analysis for storm drainage infrastructure, which also recently published, 700 pages long, lots of really good information in there. Lots of considerations, including green and gray infrastructure. Our National Guide for Wildland Urban Interface Fires was also published. We showed as well, we did an impact study of that guideline that showed significant benefits, I think over 4-to-1 benefits for investing in resilient design for wildfire, and also highlighted the fact that you can't just do it at the building level, you have to really address it in the community as well to reduce the costs of adaptation at the building. And the final item I want to mention too is that the latest edition of the Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code was updated. We updated the data that was used, the design data. Some of it was older than I am, so from the 70s or earlier. So happy to say we're now designing for the current climate, as well as it contains sustainability considerations and resilience considerations in there too. So those are just a handful of successes from the first phase, some of the major ones. There's a number of other documents, guidance, research that was conducted as well, including on bridge cable design. I want to do a shout out again to Guy, looking to influence really the Post-Tensioning Institute code in the States, or the guidelines in the States for the design of bridge cables, because we recognize that when they're covered in ice, they don't exactly act as predicted and can create loads in excess of what the design currently is. Okay, so moving forward from CRB-CPI, pleased to announce that we are now working on our Climate Resilient Built Environment Initiative. We have about a year under our belt so far, so we spent that developing and launching a whole series of projects in this space. The focus has changed now a little bit from the previous effort, where we looked primarily at what data is needed, what fundamental data, such as how is Canada's climate changing, how is that going to affect our infrastructure and our buildings, and what can we do about it. We're now pivoting to take that knowledge and integrate it where we can. Of course, there's going to be new knowledge generated in certain areas. We want to focus on nature-based solutions, for example, as well as flooding infrastructure, including dams, which was not included in the first phase. But we're also looking to now integrate our knowledge into decision-making tools for professionals. So the tools for the management, design, management of public infrastructure in particular. We're also looking to enable regulation by moving some of our guidance through to standardization, as well as working on advancing those codes as well, including the bridge design code, the electrical code, and the building code. And finally, out of the four that are shown on, well, there's a fifth one I'll talk to in a second, but the four main ones, there's also advancing technical solutions, where we're looking to partner with industry, help industry adapt to both develop solutions for monitoring, but as well as adaptation solutions and technologies to enable our infrastructure and buildings to adapt. And the final one you'll see here, and I think is very critical for this audience, is to build capacity in Canada and abroad. We recognized during the first phase that we are scientists, we are researchers, we can do the foundational work, we can only bring it so far. We're getting better at integrating it into standards and codes and guidance. But at the end of the day, that's just one piece of the puzzle. So we need to partner with others, both nationally and internationally, to help get this information out and used. So I'm going to just give you a few highlights of the projects that we've begun in this space. So I'm going to have about 7 slides on these different topics that give you a sense of where we're headed right now. There's obviously opportunities to adjust. This is our first year. We have 4 more years remaining. So if there's any critical research topics, I'm always happy to listen to you and hear where those challenges are and see if we can address them within our program. So in terms of tools for public infrastructure management, we're going to be looking at integrating climate considerations into decision support tools for life cycle management. This includes condition assessment, evaluation, deteriorate and life cycle performance, risk assessment, mitigation, and project management. And so some of the areas that are identified here include building envelope design, such as roofing design, commercial roofing designs, one specific area there. Water, wastewater, where we're looking at decision support for sewer rehabilitation, optimized water distribution systems in a changing climate as well. For bridges, looking at more closely at load carrying capacity and resilience enhancement for bridges. Tools for pavement design in a changing climate, and also looking at the impacts of climate change on service life prediction, LCA and LCCA. We also are about to put out a request for proposals for a survey of tools being currently used for the management of public infrastructure. And we're hoping to leverage that information to really target some of the tools that are currently used across the country and identify any gaps that remain. In the area of flooding, working in a few different areas in a few different ways. One of them is to move now from risk assessment of coastal infrastructure to methods for adapting that infrastructure. So trying to come up now with solutions and guidelines on then how to adapt existing coastal infrastructure to increase our climate resilience. We are completing our suite of work on flood resilient buildings. In the first phase, we worked with the United States experts to bring some of the guidance on how to build in flood-prone areas, as well as how to retrofit buildings that are in flood-prone areas as well. The final piece of the puzzle is now to come up with more specific work on load factors and load combinations for the Canadian context that we can then use for the structural design of flood resilient buildings. We're also looking at dams, where we've been engaging with Canadian Dam Association, as well as reviewing all different aspects of dams to try to understand how to make them more climate resilient. Here, we're just doing the review and scoping exercise in our first year because it's a new area for us, and we hope to launch a series of projects in the near future. And finally, under flooding, we're looking as well at extreme flows in a changing climate so that we can improve the design of dams as well as other riverine infrastructure. Nature-based solutions is another one of the newer areas under our work. We did some work on coastal nature-based solutions in our previous phase. We're continuing on that line of work in a particular collaboration with DND, NRCan, ISC, as well as CIRNAC. We are expanding our nature-based solutions work to now look at mitigating urban heat islanding, as well as mitigating urban flooding. So projects there include reviewing different urban heat island effects and mitigation strategies, including looking at the role of municipal water bodies in reducing urban heat islanding. We're also looking at preventing building overheating as part of that suite of work, so the community and the building within it. On the urban flooding side, we are looking more closely at nature-based solutions for commercial roofs. NRC a while ago was looking at green roofs for commercial roofs. Now we're expanding that to blue roofs. So these are roofs that can contain water and help mitigate the runoff during urban flooding events and extreme urban flooding. So we have a whole consortium of roofing members on board there to help work on that area. We're also looking at evaluating the effectiveness of different types of natural flood mitigation measures, and also looking at how natural as well as gray infrastructure can work together in a real-time control strategy to help mitigate urban flooding. And of note here as well, we've launched an international research group with CIB, which is a buildings research organization, called Task Group 97, which is on nature-based solutions for climate resilient buildings and communities. So looking to leverage the work that's done internationally in that space as well. So code standards and specifications, I've alluded to some of this already. We have a few CSA contracts that were recently launched or we're about to launch. We're moving the durability material standard forward one more time. We first moved it from a guideline to a standard. Now we're going to look to integrate climate change considerations into that standard. We're also moving forward on the fenestration standard to integrate likely the future climate data into the design of fenestration. So that's windows and doors, I think, are included in there as well. We're moving our guideline on coastal risk assessment to a standard. We are looking to develop a new standard on risk assessment of dams, and also likely moving forward on work with the CSA on the electrical code. We're going to move the wildland urban interface design guideline forward to a standard as well as keep working with Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code to increase the resilience and to hopefully integrate the future climate design data. I do have to mention on codes and standards that we can only do so much. It's up to the committees to decide what's in and what's out. Ultimately, this is what we're trying to get done as well with those committees and to work with them within the process. So with the CHBDC committees, we're going to be working as well on galvanic corrosion. So working on a new guideline for galvanic corrosion in a changing climate. We have also launched a project with TAC, the Transport Association of Canada, and some provinces and territories are on board as well to update the new guideline or the guideline to bridge hydraulics. So to hopefully prevent damage from extreme flooding to bridges in that case. And then also we're working to integrate the climate design data in the Highway Bridge Design Code. On the building code side, we're as well working with those committees, hopefully for the next round to introduce or integrate the future climate design data into the building code, and also move forward on some of the policy work that's needed to support resilient building codes as we move forward. Here I want to mention as well, our Global Resiliency Dialogue has developed guidance, or has produced a couple of papers on trying to understand the current state of resilience in building codes in the 4 countries involved, which is Canada, US, New Zealand, and Australia. I also leveraged the Infrastructure and Buildings Working Group recently. About a year ago, I asked for input on some of the challenges and needs in the building space to be able to have resilient building codes. I'm pleased to say that paper should be published in a couple of weeks' time. It takes a little while to dot all the I's and cross all the T's and get it translated. But once that is available, I will send that out to you, to this group. I'll email it to Dan and to Chad, and they can share it. And then also on that note, we're also now developing guidelines for making building codes more resilient. So that's an international effort, and hope to have that out by COP27. Okay, a few more slides. Bear with me. There's a lot of information to share today, that's for sure. On the transit space, we're continuing our work on developing guidance and models for rail resilience, in particular for freeze thaw and thermal stress. And we've also undertaken this year a review of all the transit guidance currently used in Canadian municipalities. So here we're looking to identify where climate resilience updates are needed, and again, where some of the potential gaps are. We're also working more specifically in the northern under this phase. We have work ongoing on sea ice as well as winter roads to better understand the impacts, as well as methods for mitigation for climate change. More work on permafrost as well is ongoing. So looking at different mitigation and monitoring techniques. This includes use of thermosiphons as well as other passive measures as well for mitigating permafrost melt. And we're also considering satellite-based monitoring near infrastructure and buildings of interest. So this builds upon some of the monitoring work we've done on bridges with satellites. So looking to use a similar technique to monitor permafrost near important structures. We are also considering, but have not yet launched, a wildland urban interface guide for the North, which takes into consideration more considerations for remote communities. We're also looking at dams and permafrost, so exploring the impact of climate change on dams in permafrost areas. And also we are looking to leverage NRC's Arctic and Northern Challenge program and some of the proposals that come through there that might be related to resilience. So we'll know more about that if there's other ideas that come through in the next year or so. Okay, technical solutions. I think this is my last one of the technical areas. On technical solutions here, looking to help industry move forward. One is on monitoring and evaluation. So leveraging some of the work on satellite monitoring, in particular, our Bridgetal platform, which we've been working with Transport Canada on as well, to look at extending that to different types of infrastructure, such as airports, I think ports as well, as mentioned, permafrost. We're also looking right now to develop a tool for the evaluation, safety, and serviceability of aged bridge columns. We're also working on adaptation of different types of assets. So one is on the adaptation of commercial roofs. We have another one that looks at strengthening deficient reinforced concrete bridges, project on corrosion resilience. And we've also been conducting a review of pervious concrete application in Canada to see what the state of play is currently in Canada, where it's being used, what some of the guidance abroad is, so we can really develop guidance on the best technologies to use here in Canada. And finally, we are launching this year a consortium of building envelope manufacturers, so mainly wall manufacturers and components of walls, to get a sense of how they'll perform in future climates. So I want to leave you with this slide, and I'll show you a couple links on the next slide. That's the last one. But I want to leave you with this slide that is really, in my mind, the pathway to getting to resilience. As a researcher, as I mentioned, we understand the foundational science. We can work with others to advance our understanding of future loads and how our infrastructure is going to react and how to adapt. We can develop guidance based on that information. We can then update the standards. We can work with industry to develop the technologies. We can help with decision support tools. But this green box is really where we need help, to put it bluntly, is, how do we get this information now in the hands of the users, the owners, the associations? We need everyone on board. Can we integrate this information into education materials? Can we develop new resilience certification programs? Can we de-risk some of this guidance and these technologies through pilot projects? Can we work with committees to update codes or integrate this information into construction specifications, all the way through to incentive programs, as well as the impact assessments that can help support people picking this information up and using it? So I think we're all part of the solution here, and always keen to identify new partners that can help us, especially with this green box. So this is my last slide on resources, just to let you know that there is a website. It is a bit out of date, but it does mention all the activities that we've undertaken. If you're interested in any particular activity, please do send me an email. I'm happy to connect you to the latest information that's available. There's a more detailed webinar that's available from the first phase of work. If you want to spend a whole hour listening to me talk, you're welcome to check that one out. And also, I always like to share a link to the Canadian Centre for Climate Services, which is where we're trying to ensure that all the information is available through a central platform there. So that is the end of my time. So thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you, Marianne. This is great. Really appreciate, once again, what a articulate representation of a broad array of important work on which it's been a pleasure to work with you. And I guess at this moment, we'll see if there are any questions. I would say, Marianne, there's been a fair amount of discussion in the chat, which has just disappeared from my screen. But I know one of the questions was Julia Tang asking about availability of your presentation. And so maybe, and there's one other comment too from Mark Seasons from Waterloo about engaging with planners. But perhaps I could just ask you first that simple question about the availability of the presentation.
Yeah, definitely. I did send a copy to Dan, so
Great.
Encourage Dan to send out the PDF to everyone so they can have it.
Super duper. Okay, I'm looking for hands as we wind down my moderation time of this call before I turn it over to Dan.
I did see one question in the chat, just when do I sleep? I like that one. But I'm very thankful. It's not just me. We have a huge team behind me, which has been great. So they make my life easy. So I just get to spout all the wonderful work they're doing.
That's terrific. Yeah, it's true. I wish that we could clone you and your colleagues. Oh, will I offer one more? Oh, there's Johanna. So, okay, Johanna, floor to you then.
Hi, Marianne. I just wondered for obviously, I'm interested in the nature-based solution side, and I know your title is like built infrastructure. Is there a kind of is there intention to have like a natural infrastructure kind of parallel, or is that going to go through your initiative? I'm just kind of interested how, because like for the national adaptation strategy, it's resilient, natural, and built infrastructure.
It's a good question. I mean, within our scope, we are the climate resilient built environment, so that is generally our focus. Tends to be on buildings and urban environments, as well as even the coastal work, of course, tends to be on the built side. So what can we add to the natural infrastructure to support coastal regions? It is a good question. Actually, something maybe I'll take back to Infrastructure Canada and see, is there a gap there that we need to address, and is it addressed by our program or elsewhere?
And I'm also thinking our last report was combining natural and built infrastructure, and I think the meshing together is so important that we think about how natural systems are working with our built systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's an area we can definitely look at and discuss further. Happy to have a conversation with you, Joanna, as well.
Great, that would be great.
Yes, thank you, Joanna. Are there other questions at this time from the floor? And maybe while people think of that, I just wanted to situate in my mind. We've heard a really important discussion during this call about the Envision framework and the work on the bridge, which involved a great deal of understanding the risks and understanding the risk reduction measures. And you can see how the NRC's work has played a vital role in the risk reduction measures. And then I really appreciated throwing the gauntlet down, Marianne, in terms of that green, how do we mobilize, socialize, get the uptake and implementation of this work? So I just think it's helpful sometimes to aggregate, because of the breadth and depth of this work, that there's so much good work to be done on understanding risks, and also the risk reduction measures and articulating success and pulling this stuff up into the real world. Any other questions at this point, or I'll become quiet and turn over to Dan. Really will just say thank you again, Marianne. Thank you to all for using the chat and sharing some resources and references in there. I think, Dan, my time here is done, unless we have other questions that I've missed. With that, I'm going to turn. There you go.
Nicole Vukos has unmuted themselves. Oh, okay, never mind.
Okay, well, let's segue then to Dan. Over to you, and thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Chad. And just an additional note on Marianne's presentation and request for assistance on the green box. I think that's one way that a group like this can help is implementation, mobilization of those tools and resources that have been developed over these years and will be coming out. So hopefully that's a discussion that we can continue on with this group. And if there are members of the committee that want to engage directly, or say you want to request a specific session on outcomes and talk about how they could be applied and resources that are needed to apply outcomes from these programs, that would be a great session, I think, for a group like ours. So keep those in mind. So we're going to turn it over now to Harshan Radhakrishnan and Kurt Hall, who are going to be giving us brief updates from their organizations on their climate change resilience work. In the interest of time and giving them appropriate time for the presentations, I'll copy and paste their bios into the chat. But this is the part of the session that we have every quarter, where members, anybody in our working group, is welcome to provide an update on their ongoing work, of course, in the form of a full presentation like we just heard earlier, or in short updates for more specific programs. So just keep in mind, at any point, if you want to approach us with ideas for short updates, that option is open. So I'm going to pass it over to Harshan, if you'd like to share your screen and begin your presentation. There we go. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here. And, it's a hard act to follow. I'll mention that right off the bat. Totally impressed with the presentation so far, especially Marianne, all the work that you're doing for Infrastructure Canada. This is going to be like a really short update. I'm just going to be talking about this title here is a little bit cheeky, talking about regulatory response on climate change, but suffice to say that we all have common but differentiated responsibilities as it relates to sustainability writ large. And I'm just going to be giving a flavor for how it looks like as implemented by a regulatory body in BC. Some of you may have heard about me presenting about the EGBC Climate Change Action Plan at the last year's Infrastructure and Buildings Working Group meeting. So you can consider this as a brief update on who we are, what our mandate is, a quick update on the plan, the update on ongoing initiatives, as well as we just presented to our CEO a three-year timeline of initiatives as it relates to climate change and sustainability initiatives. I can talk a little bit about that, but just thrilled to be here. Yeah, thanks for having me. In relation to EGBC's mandate under the Professional Governance Act, we have...
Harshan, sorry to interrupt, but if you meant to share your screen to show slides, you might want to try again.
Is that better?
There we go. Thank you.
Good stuff. So I just wanted to let you know that we are the provincial body for engineering and geoscience professions in BC, and we have currently over 40,000 registrants that work in diverse areas of practice. Our mandate, as outlined in the Professional Governance Act, is to establish, monitor, and enforce standards of professional practice. And we also enforce standards for entry into practice. And you can see the last bullet point talks about the increased responsibility that Engineers Geoscience BC and all regulated entities under the PGA have in relation to responding to and adapting to changes in practice environments, advances in technology, and other emerging areas. So there's a lot of linkages with the work that EGBC does in relation to sustainability and our responsibilities under the Professional Governance Act. So those that have attended the last year's presentation might be very familiar with the outline of the slides, but essentially what Engineers Geoscience BC's professional practice-led climate change action plan. In fact, this is starting to be largely integrated throughout EGBC through an appropriate notation in the Engineers Geoscience BC's strategic plan under the pillar of social responsibility, which includes things like engagement with Indigenous peoples of BC, focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and climate action. Our plan talks to leadership, how we can lead by example, how we can collaborate with others to leverage resources and enhance impact, how we look at our registration process for professional engineers and geoscientists to make sure that that process incorporate appropriate climate change related competencies, how we can provide ongoing continuing education events to enable knowledge sharing on some of the key challenges and opportunities climate change brings to professional practice. And finally, how we can develop relevant and practical practice resources to help inform and transform the way they practice. So these slides I'll quickly whip through. You can see, I'm happy to share these slides. You can look at it at your leisure, but essentially it talks to how we are currently implementing the climate change action plan. This one about collaboration and partnerships, as a matter of fact, I'll note that we've been very fortunate to work with multiple stakeholders in terms of making sure that the PIVC protocol is available and it's currently modified for wide applicability. So this is something that we are proud of, and we'll continue to work on that. But suffice to say that we engage widely and we engage consistently. In terms of the new areas of practice, we are recognizing emerging areas of practice through our annual information reporting form. And in response to the consultation in relation to the plan development, we heard that a lot of folks have started to assume climate-related roles within their professional careers. And we wanted to recognize that and enable those that are qualified by virtue of education, training, experience, and honest conviction to declare these as their areas of practice. And you can see clearly that there's more than 200 registrants that have declared these as their areas of practice. And we fully anticipate that these numbers will organically grow. And an outcome of this process is that EGBC will work with registrants to identify what are the key competencies, what are the practice standards, and what are the ongoing training needs as it relates to these emerging practice areas. This one about education and knowledge sharing, I'm happy to note that since the release of the plan, there's been multiple presentations offered at the branch level, at the division level, all enabling knowledge sharing. So there are staff-led events related to climate change sustainability, but it's great to see the sheer number of events that we have been able to post through the EGBC events portal. And as it stands, we do have that cordial relationship where we post on external events on BRACE-related training programs. I know Kurt is going to talk to you in detail about one such program, which will provide a key demonstration of how professional regulatory bodies can provide support by way of ongoing continuing education. And practice resources, this is one we are very proud of. We do make sure that we put in that time and effort to apply a climate lens to the development of these practice guidelines. And it's not just professional practice guidelines that we offer to our registrants, but also those that we work with other stakeholders on to make sure that the knowledge and awareness is not limited to certain groups, but that's widely available to professionals writ large. In the interest of time, I'll quickly gloss through this. Suffice to say, we have both ongoing climate initiatives that keep us busy on a daily basis, but also yearly climate-related programming that commit us to delivering on providing platforms for recognition, knowledge sharing, and so on through these structured mechanisms. And in terms of the next steps, I'm happy to note that we presented a 3-year timeline of actions to our leadership team, and we're working with the entire organization to make sure that there is buy-in and there is balance in terms of making sure that we are able to deliver this in a manner that respects EGBC's other regulatory and social responsibilities. So the key takeaways is that, we have a unanimously council and endorsed climate change action plan that provides a strategic direction for engineers and geoscience BC. And we have already operationalized many of the actions in the plan. And through this 3-year timeline, what we have done is we have identified the resource needs and the plans to be able to make sure that we are effectively able to implement all aspects of the climate plan. And we are moving confidently with implementation in consultation with our advisory groups and registrants. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Harshan. We always appreciate your contributions to this working group and the leadership of EGBC in this area. We're coming up against the clock, so we'll pass it quickly over to Kurt.
Thanks very much, Dan, and thanks Harshan for your presentation. We've here in Manitoba, Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba has been in communication with Harshan and his colleague Malcolm Shield for some time, and hopefully we'll be moving towards a climate change and an environment and climate change initiative in step with, or at least following on, the leadership that Engineers Geoscientists British Columbia has taken for us. But my update today, my report today on the activities for Manitoba and Manitoba Engineering Geoscientists Manitoba has to do with our BRACE project. And it's been mentioned earlier in this meeting by a couple of presenters about the BRACE initiative. And so I'm going to just talk about our experience here in Manitoba and our achievements. So the BRACE acronym is for Building Regional Adaptation Capacity and Expertise. And it's an initiative of NRCan, and we're grateful for its leadership in that regard. And there have been BRACE projects in all the provinces and I think territories, I'm not sure, but it's pretty widespread as far as the uptake of this project to enhance adaptive capacity across the country when it comes to our various aspects. But here in Manitoba, Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba has focused on infrastructure and climate resilience and adaptation for infrastructure. So that the flavor of BRACE in Manitoba has been labeled or branded as MCRT, Manitoba Climate Resilience Training, and that's what has been developed here over the course of the last 18 months or so. It was actually started with a scoping project in 2018, but we really got into the development of the courses that were presented in late 2020, October 2020. And we developed, not just Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba, but a number of different organizations took on different sectors to develop training. And that's what you see in this slide here, is that there's something like 18 courses that were ultimately developed by the different sectors. So we've got an integrator, that's the dark purple. We've got a planner sector, the green courses. Our sector was infrastructure, and that's the 3 courses that we developed and delivered on climate risk, risk assessment using IBWG, code standards and regulations, and nature-based infrastructure. We put on courses on those 3 topics. Then there were other courses put on by Northern business sector, and an Indigenous sector. And what we recommended for our audience and potential audience was an infrastructure stream. And that's the courses that you see here. And so there were other courses that we, Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba, didn't necessarily present, but we thought provided really good foundational understanding that would help to set the stage for the 3 infrastructure courses that we did deliver ourselves. And we included in our presentation a catch-up primer session, which was more of a discussion on those other modules before we went into the infrastructure. And we really have had a good uptake on those courses that we did deliver. That I was quite pleased at the uptake and the enhancement of interest amongst practitioners, engineers, geoscientists, and technologists in the province when it comes to climate change adaptation and resilience. And I think the outcomes, I'm still doing the analysis of our numbers, but we've at our courses, we had over 100 registrants in each of those courses and good engagement throughout. So what we've moved to now on the training website, mcrtproject.ca, is you can access the courses that were previously delivered through this page here. And if you click on it on the page, you'll come to usually a YouTube recording of the course of the presentation. Most of these courses are 90 minutes long, or at least the recording is 90 minutes long. In our case, it was 90 minutes of course presentation, then half an hour of additional discussion time. But these courses on the mcrtprojects.ca website is only going to be available until April 1st. And after April 1st, all of this material moves to Climate West. And this sort of speaks to what came up in earlier presentations to do with, I think Marianne Armstrong was mentioning about how to get this information in her project initiative out to the audiences. And this is what we're focused on now, because this project is, for all intents and purposes, coming to an end. But we're looking to how do we keep this going? We've spent a lot of time developing really good information. A lot of good courses have been developed. We worked personally, like our sector worked with the International Institute for Sustainable Development on the nature-based infrastructure. We worked with Red River Community College, Red River College Polytechnic, they've changed their name, on the code standards and regulations. But we don't want this to come to an end April 1st. So the recordings are going to move into Climate West. And if you look on that training tab, you'll get, there's going to be a section for Alberta, for Saskatchewan, and for Manitoba. And I know there's some courses up there already from Alberta. They call theirs ART, or Alberta Resilience Training. And so what we're talking about is we're on the cusp of discussions as to how to continue this momentum, how to keep moving this forward, and potentially how to include additional courses like the climate resilience course that was discussed earlier and the Envision framework, potentially those kinds of things as we move forward. So that's sort of where we have an uncertainty because we need support for that and coordination potentially nationally. NRCan would be a great place for that. And but that's my very brief update. So
great, thank you, Kurt, and thank you, Harshan. And apologies for the limited amount of time that we had to discuss these obviously important programs that we could certainly spend some more time on. We are coming up against the clock. I'm sure there are some questions from the group. If we didn't get time to get to them all, we're about 5 minutes over time here. Please feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll make sure they get to Harshan and Kurt. Just before we close up though, Kurt and Harshan, Kurt, you mentioned specifically this proposed group, Climate West. Are you seeing increasing movement toward these types of education programs from some of the other provincial bodies involved in regulation of your industry? Are they going to be involved in issuing these courses as well?
Yeah, actually, the last week we had an end of project workshop. There were actually NRCan put on 2 national workshops last Tuesday and last Thursday, I think they were, where all of the different BRACE projects across the country got to share their experience in the current phase. And one of the key suggestions or topics or concerns amongst all of the participants basically was, what's the next step? How are we going to support this moving forward? And so I think that message was heard by NRCan, and it remains to be seen yet how it's going to carry on. But they actually were fairly clear to say, nope, there's no funding available right now, but when this funding is ending March 31st, and that's it. So they were making no promises, but I think there was certainly a request from a lot of the different BRACE projects.
Great. Well, thanks again for your contributions here, and we'll for sure continue to follow your work and hopefully have you back again soon. I think thanks, Harshan and Kurt. I think we'll turn toward wrapping up the meeting here, Chad, as we are about six minutes over time. Thanks to everyone for sticking around. I think most of us are still here. Before I pass it over to Chad for some concluding remarks, I just wanted to say thanks again, everyone. Thanks to our presenters for another great session. Thanks to all of our participants. We had a really great turnout, about 60 people on the line today. And we just want to reiterate once again that please do submit ideas for future infrastructure buildings working group sessions. We're really interested in hearing from this community. We really do capture a large part of the community working on adaptation resilience in this area. So any contributions that you're willing to provide would be greatly appreciated with respect to topics, your projects, your programs. We really want to hear what's going on. And we'll for sure keep everybody up to date. The next meeting will be in June. And again, feel free to disseminate meeting invites to the group. We're happy to grow this group as much as possible. And so I'll pass it back to Chad.
Oh, thanks, Dan. I don't think I can add anything any more eloquent than you've already shared. I think that was a great summation of where we've come to and where we have to go. You know, one of the, I guess, watchwords I've heard is that, you know, we have made a great deal of progress in this country over the last 5 to 10 years, but we also are realizing that we have much more to do. And so I'm just thrilled the idea that this can be a forum that helps to facilitate that collaboration and sharing of resources and goodwill, because that's certainly needed in the world. So that's as poetic as I'll be. I put the future dates into the session, I think June 7th, if I'm going to recite what I typed correctly. But thank you very much. I really appreciate people stuck around today with very informative presentations. We're really trying to change the world here at many scales. So I think that's it, a wrap for me, Dan. Thanks to everybody.
Okay, thanks everyone.